Well, thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here with this group. This is the future. What's going on in this council is definitely the future. I said North American perspective. I should have said a North American perspective, because there are a lot of people that don't agree with what I'm about to say in the United States, and so let's bear that in mind. But I'm going to give you my personal look. And so I think there's no question that the game has completely changed in acute stroke, and there's also no question that innovation is the absolute key. I got plenty of conflicts, but none of them that will be reflected in this talk. We all know this. Overall, 16 million strokes in the world every year, and a third of them recover, a third of them die, and a third of them are destroyed by their stroke and end up in nursing homes and costing society, families, patients, our governmental sponsors, enormous grief. Until 2015, we really didn't have any other approved treatment other than TPA, and TPA clearly had benefit. On the other hand, if you looked at the overall results, somewhere near 60% of the patients were dead or disabled at 3 months with TPA. So now, can stroke be reversed? And the answer is, of course, absolutely yes, it can. And I will say that in my career, there's nothing I've ever seen that can replace the dramatic improvement in a patient from this picture to this picture, which happens over a period of a minute or two when the clot comes out and a patient goes from aphasic and hemiplegic, not knowing where he is, total neglect, to completely normal in minutes. And it's an extraordinary thing that happens. And until I saw it on the table for myself, I don't think I would have believed it. And believe it or not, the first patient that I saw this incredible change was a priest. So there must be some religious aspect to this. So he was a priest at Canisius College, and he came in with a major left hemispheric stroke. He was completely out of it. He was taken to one of the Catholic hospitals, and there was an ER doc there who said, well, there's this lunatic neurosurgeon over across the way that would probably take a shot at getting this clot out. And so they sent him over to us, and he had very, very straightforward anatomy. And I put a guide catheter up, and the catheter just kept going and going, and it finally got into the petrous carotid, and I aspirated to see what was going on. The next thing I knew, all the vessels were open, and this T occlusion, which is the worst, was completely normal. And so that was the real epiphany for me, and it happened in the early 80s. So this is a big deal. In 2015, we had the game changer. There were 7 major trials that showed overwhelming benefit for stroke intervention. Not complicated. Get the clot out, and the patient gets better if you get it in time. So very reminiscent of what's happened with STEMI over the years, right? I mean, it was at first nobody did anything. Then they started using lytics, and I remember growing up with a STEMI patient coming in, and the cardiologist saying, well, we'll give him some TPA and we'll see him in the morning. And of course, now that's all changed. What's the catch? Catch is that time is brain is far more critical than time is muscle. So if you look at the revascularization rates, we are beginning to approach the cardiologists with TIMI and TICI scores. And the difference is that we get most of the vessels open now, but the results are not nearly as good, with modified Rankin scores that are well below where we think they should be. So we got to think about why is that. So what does this mean? Time is brain. We all know these numbers, and they scare us to death. Every minute, we lose a couple of million neurons and a bunch of synapses and miles of nerve fibers. This is our whole system going to pot in a big hurry. Here's what's critical. This is the most important thing I'm going to say today, and that is that if you look at all the subset analyses from those trials done in 2015, what you find is that overall, in general, in the entire patient population. You get the artery open within 2 hours of onset, 90% recovery. If it takes 6 hours, 20 to 25% recovery. This is a huge delta, and it, of course, diminishes every hour that goes by. Okay. We can extend the time window, and the recent DAWN trial helped us. This is something that we've known for a long time, but finally we have data that proves it, that out to 24 hours, if you look at the CT perfusion study or the MR perfusion study, we use CT because it's quicker. Whoops, excuse me. Will this go backward?
Yes.
Yeah. So if the brain is not getting any perfusion, like this guy here, we know there's no blood volume in that region, and that brain is probably dead. If the time to peak is way up, in other words, the flow is delayed, but the cerebral blood volume is okay, or sometimes even increased, then we know that the likelihood is those brain cells are viable. So we're going to go for it. And we'll go for it not just to 24 hours. We'll go for it to 48 hours or 72 hours. If the perfusion study shows there is blood volume getting to that area, those cells may well be alive. So that's a key thing. And when you looked at the results of the DAWN trial, you can see this enormous benefit for stroke intervention versus best medical therapy, which is TPA, out to 24 hours in selected patients. So, tremendous parallels between what's going on in STEMI and what's going on in acute stroke. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those. So, when you look at the care delivery system, there's no question in my mind that the STEMI model is where we're headed in stroke. And I will say that everything I'm going to say today, I'm going to try to raise questions. I'm not going to try to dictate what I think has to be done. I'm just going to raise a lot of questions, and then hopefully you guys can help answer them. So we got to get the artery open quickly. We know that 2 hours is the key number. And how can we do that? Well, we can only do it if the patient's fairly close to the point of treatment, right? I mean, if you got to transfer the patient, that you're out the window. And I think the STEMI model is absolutely going to be mandated one of these days. It's important to understand the stroke demographics. Most patients live in more rural areas, and they're not near a comprehensive stroke center where you can have 24/7, 365 intervention. So what do we do with those patients? And transfer times are long, and they're much longer than anybody thinks they are when you really look at it. And comprehensive stroke centers, you don't see them in cities that are small or medium-sized. They're in big, major centers. So why would we not just go train a whole bunch more neurointerventionalists? Well, there's not enough work in small towns. If you trained another 10,000 neuroradiologists, interventional neurosurgeons, and neurologists, what would they do? They'd be sitting on their hands most of the time because there's not enough work in smaller sized communities to keep them busy and enable them to make a living. Well, we got 16 million strokes in the world. About 30 to 40% are large vessel occlusions which are potentially treatable with intervention. We don't have a whole lot of comprehensive stroke centers where this can be done. And most of our neuro community is concentrated in these comprehensive stroke centers. We got a 2-hour window. We need a lot more physicians to do stroke, right? We got to have. Where are they going to come from? I think we're going to get them from new stroke interventionists in existing hospitals. In other words, other disciplines need to learn how to treat stroke. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we do stroke training. And I think for most busy interventionalists, it's very, very possible to learn stroke treatment fairly quickly. I would suggest that people think about the ICCA meeting, which will occur in Warsaw in April. organized by Horst Sievert. And I think that'll be a really good, mostly didactic, but some recorded live cases. So I think that's really worth considering. So how we do it? It's all about technology. You've got to have the right technology to get there, and that's becoming more and more advanced. And if you look at where we are with stroke intervention, I'm thinking we're somewhere in here. Maybe this is aspiration, because now that's becoming popular. But if we look down the road 5 or 10 years, it's all going to be different. And that's a key point, because other people who are not neurointerventionalists, those people, we got to have tools that are easy to use, safe, and effective. And I think we'll get that much quicker than anybody thinks. There are, at last count, 60 startup companies in the stroke space. I don't know which one's going to succeed, but somebody will. And practice. So it's about technology and practice. We use simulation. We like the Mentis. But here's the new kid on the block. We now are able to 3D print your anatomy. I can take your anatomy from the CT angiogram, or your anatomy, or my anatomy, and I can feed that data set to the Stratasys 3D printer, and I can make a patient-specific 3D model. And we now have a polymer combination, which we've developed over the years, that when you hook it up into a flow system, put a catheter in it, it feels a lot like the real deal. So this has virtually replaced all of our animal work. So this is just much better than anything else we've ever seen. And it works. The devices that we're testing work very well in these models. So I really do believe that any interested doc with catheter skills can learn to do this. And I think the key is to create a multidisciplinary team. Even in the intermediate-sized centers, I mean, who wants to be on call every night for stroke? It's a real pain in the neck. So you should try to develop a stroke team. And you can do that with interventional neuroradiologists, interventional cardiologists, interventional neurologists, and neurosurgeons. And anybody else that's really interested, interventional radiologists. No reason they can't do this. So public health demands a solution, and somebody's going to do it. And I think this is the group where we really ought to get going and do it. So what do cardiologists all do all day? They fix narrow and blocked arteries on awake patients and a moving target. Stroke ought to be a piece of cake for cardiologists, right? Yes, the cerebral anatomy is different, and the vessels are much thinner, and it's much more risky if you don't have the right tools and you don't have the right mindset and training. But cardiologists and others can learn. I suspect that cardiologists are the most suited to take this challenge on. And then we have all the infrastructure. We've got cardiac cath labs everywhere. How many neurointerventional centers do we have in smaller towns? We don't, but they're all over the place for cardiac cath labs. So the infrastructure is there. So for rural areas, I'm proposing a new treatment paradigm. Retrieve the clot immediately at the point where the stroke occurs, probably in a cardiac cath lab if it's in a smaller community. And then, if the patient doesn't get a great result and it's complicated, ship them to a neurocenter. But ship them with a brain that's being perfused. What's happening now is we're spending hours shipping people with a vessel that is occluded, and the brain's not getting perfused. And we know about that 2-hour, 6-hour deal. So get the artery open. And I would suggest you might take a look at this piece that David Holmes and I did in the spring. I think it was in probably April, that went through a bunch of revisions, and then we had some real vitriol in the responses from the neuro community. But the fact is, we really think this is the way it's going to go. Let me talk a little bit about innovation. What is it? Collisions, collaboration, innovation. I'm going to say this over and over again. The impact of cardiovascular disease and stroke, we all know it is enormous. We got neuro, cardiac, and peripherals. We got the same diseases, the same arteries, the same vascular highway, similar tools. Why in the world are we not working together? I don't get that. Just innovation, what is it? We're building a better future for stroke, and I think we want to talk a little bit about systems of care and technology. And here we are with a North American perspective. This is a really complex issue. Anybody recognize the artist? Miro, of course. Where's the painting? It's in Buffalo. So, this I think is really, really important. And I don't think there's been a whole lot of thought given to this at this point. Here are the challenges. Patient and physician awareness. It's still relatively low, particularly in the patients. What happens when somebody has a stroke is they lose cognitive function. So I've interviewed stroke patients who've had 2 minor strokes. They have the first one and they go back to bed. I say, well, why didn't you call somebody? I thought it would go away. I thought my arm just fell asleep. Then the same guy has another stroke. Goes back to bed. And I say, well, what? Well, I don't like hospitals. I just didn't want. The point is, cognitively, they're all screwed up. So they don't recognize that they have a stroke. And that's really an important differentiator between that and heart disease. I mean, you know when you're having a heart attack, right? You're sick. You don't know when you're having a stroke. And that feeds into the time delay because people don't recognize it, their families aren't really sure, and it adds to that time delay. So, I should have just gone back. So, all right, awareness, inertia, huge inertia in medicine. A major shift is going to be met with a lot of resistance, and it's going to take a long time. Cataclysmic specialty shift. We're going from calling the neurologist who will see the patient in the morning to an emergency with a different specialty, by and large. So it's a huge shift. That in itself is tough. Reimbursement is still a major problem in many parts of the world. Manpower, we talked about, and the systems of care are, I think, critically important, and technology is going to get better and better. Speed to treatment goals. We got to think about this. It takes about an hour to get the patient from his home, or wherever he is, into the hospital. 1 hour's gone. I only got 1 hour left. ER door to CT scan to needle in the groin has to get down near 30 minutes. How are we going to do that? I can tell you our hoped solution, we are getting a new piece of equipment in the ER next month, combination CT angio. So the patient will go directly from the ER door into our CT scanner, which is in the emergency room, but now the CT scanner will be an angio suite as well. So within 5 minutes, the patient's in CT, and another 5 minutes for image acquisition, and in 10 minutes, we'll have that patient prepped and draped and ready to go. So I think this, at least in our situation, is going to make a big difference. So there, our innovation in systems of care, I'd say it's still too soon to be sure whether this is going to be successful, but I'm going to tell you about it. This is the Gates Vascular Institute and the Jacobs Institute. And so people ask the question, well, why a vascular center in Buffalo, New York? And then if you look at the stroke map, the stroke belt is down here in the southeast. And then you see all these other areas where there's some pockets. And then you look at New York State, and there's this little black dot right in the western end of New York State. That's Buffalo, New York. Why is our incidence of cardiovascular disease and stroke so high? Anybody know? It's easy. It's chicken wings. This is Teresa's Anchor Bar. And that's where chicken wings were invented, folks. So every time you have a chicken wing, think about Buffalo. They call them buffalo wings. Here's the amazing part. Teresa's every year has a chicken wing eating contest, believe it or not. 45,000 pounds of chicken wings were brought to Buffalo this year for this contest. And so people are munching on chicken wings all the time, and that's why we have such a high incidence of cardiovascular disease and stroke. And here's the ultimate irony. Teresa's is right across the street from the vascular center. We're thinking about a zip line. Okay, so why a vascular center? Well, why a vascular center? Because we got the #1 crippler and killer in heart attack and stroke. We got heart, head, and legs. We got all these specialists, and they all work in their own departmental silos. And how many times do you, in your daily activities, interact with another vascular discipline? Doesn't happen, does it? You're so busy doing your own thing that you don't interact. And yet, I think we have something to learn from each other. And then when you go out to university, you find the same thing. The vascular scientists work in their silos. They don't talk to each other either. And God knows they don't come down and talk to the clinicians. So there's this complete lack of coordinated care among the disciplines. So goal number 1, break down the silos. Goal number 2, change the treatment paradigm by bringing everybody together. Goal number 3, let's create a center for innovation. In this new milieu that we've created, let's create a center for innovation. And we're calling that is the Jacobs Institute I2R, or idea to reality. Idea, nascent idea, to actual proof that the idea works. Medical technology, where the future is. Okay, has to be independent. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, this is how it started. We run a vascular conference every year in Jackson, Wyoming, and we bring the key opinion leaders from all the vascular disciplines together: cardiology, vascular surgery, radiology, neuro. The only rule is that everybody that's invited has to get up in front of the whole group and present his worst disaster of the year. So you can imagine the discussion that occurs. We invite industry to join right in with us. I know that's taboo in CME meetings, but we stopped continuing medical education because it doesn't work. If you don't have the industry working with us, we don't have innovation. So we've changed the whole paradigm of a meeting format. This was when the Jacobs family in Buffalo decided they wanted to do something different, and we said, let's do a vascular center. And what they did is they hooked us up with this wonderful architect from Los Angeles, and we sat with him at this meeting for 2 days and thought about all the things that we wanted to see in the vascular center of the future. Look down the road 25 years. And what he said after the first hour is, you guys, you're making this easy for me. What you're saying to me is you want collisions. You want to be bumping into each other all the time. And we said, yeah. So can you do that? He said, yeah, I can do that. I'm going to build you guys a sandwich. I'm going to put the vascular center on the bottom. I'm going to put the research center on the top. I'm going to put the Jacobs Institute Innovation Center right in the middle. And we're going to call the Jacobs Institute the meat in the club sandwich, because that's where the innovation is going to occur. But he said you got to have a fancy cappuccino machine in the Jacobs Institute. Invite everybody from the whole hospital to come for free cappuccino. That's how you're going to get everybody together, which we did. Now, this is the actual building that we built. It came from a collection of money from the state, the federal government, philanthropy, and this is the way it sets up. With our Toshiba Stroke and Vascular Research Center on the top floor, and then all the other vascular disciplines, wet labs and so on, animal facility, vivarium, in the upper floors. The Jacobs Institute I2R is smack in the middle, and then the clinical center is on the lower floors, cath labs on the 4th floor, vascular ORs, all convertible to cath labs on the 3rd floor. The hotel on the 2nd floor, we say hotel because if we look down the road 25 years, we're guessing there won't be much surgery. It'll all be outpatient, minimally invasive procedures. So we're calling it a hotel. And the emergent facility on the bottom, as I mentioned, where we're putting our new machine. This is the 4th floor, and this was the key concept for the building because we wanted everybody forced together. So we put 15 cath labs on one floor, all vascular disciplines. And we had all the control rooms interconnected so that we could have cross-training. And every tech, nurse, and so on in that building is cross-trained, so that a cardiac nurse has a little heart, but he also has a little cluster underneath that has a brain on it, because he's a cardiac nurse, but he can do neuro as well. And it started out, there was resistance, but now it's like a badge of honor. So it's really, and then a core area where everybody goes, you can't avoid each other. It's the only place you can go between cases. And some of the amazing synergies that we've had, I think we did the first carotid TAVR over a cup of coffee. Structural heart guy, one of our guys, the heart guy's saying, I got a TAVR this afternoon and the patient's got no access. I'm going to have to go transapical. And this is about 6 years ago. And our guy said, well, why don't we just cut down on the carotid artery? They did. It took 14 minutes to do the TAVR from the time that they opened the carotid artery. And everybody said, well, you're shutting down the artery to do it. Yeah, but if you remember the old NASA trial for carotid endarterectomy, average occlusion time, want to guess? 32 minutes. So this is nothing. And we've now done, I don't know, a whole bunch of these whenever there's a patient with an access problem. That's the kind of synergies we're getting. I could go on and on. This is the Jacobs Institute I2R. The architect insisted on all these wacky colors because they would improve innovation. I don't know about that one, but this is the Innovation Center. And a word about innovation in medical technology. What's the most important thing about innovation in med tech? It costs a pile of money. It's very expensive. And here's the way it works. And this is our 9-step process to get from nascent idea to proof of concept. First, you have to evaluate the IP, market research. Is there a market for this? Is there a pathway through the FDA or the European regulatory system? And is it economically feasible? And can I prove to Medicare that this is going to save them money? Because if I can't, I got a problem. So this is our I2R, idea to reality shortcut, because we're going to do all this work. And then if we get to the point where all these 4 tests are passed, we'll make a prototype. And then we have to test that prototype. We test it in models, we test it in simulators, we test it in animals if necessary, we test it in our 3D printed models, and we go around the horn until we get it to the point where we know it's going to work when we put it in a patient. We can do the biocompatibility, we can do all of that in our shop. And then we go to product review and declare it proof of concept. Well, if we look at that first valley of death from idea to proof of concept, here's what goes on in the real world. It takes a couple of years to get to proof of concept, a couple $1 million, tremendous energy and grit, and there's still a 90+% failure rate. So here's our concept, I2R. It's idea to reality, to proof of concept, improving the process, and avoiding the first value of death. The innovation is funded by philanthropy in an independent, not-for-profit environment. I've never heard of another innovation center like that. We're completely independent, even though we lease our space from the university, and it cost me 2 years and a lot of gray hair. The university has no control over what we do, so we don't have that bureaucratic overhang. They're wonderful partners, and we partner with them on a lot of things, but they don't have any bureaucratic overhang for us, nor does the hospital. And here's the key. There's no upfront cost to the inventor. If we're successful and we get to proof of concept and we lateral this to an accelerator or a company to develop it, we will take, the JI will take royalties or equity so that someplace down the road when it's making money, we'll get some payback because somehow I got to prove to the university and everybody around us that I can pay the rent. And we're doing it now with training, which is working out, but our goal is to get to the point where we have some feedback from a bunch of companies that work their way through our process. If there is any failure along the way, and we get to the point where we say, hey, this is not going to work, it's no harm, no foul. The inventor does not pay a red cent. We absorb the cost. We can also assist in placement with an accelerator. We've got a lot of wonderful contacts in the Silicon Valley, the Minneapolis area, the Boston area, so we can help with placing an idea. We can, in our Jacobs Institute, we can make a prototype. We can test it in 3D printed models. We can test it in simulators, all in the Jacobs Institute. And we can test it in animals. Visitors really get excited about what we're doing. They want to be a part of it. Companies want to be our partners. And trainees become our ambassadors. Talk to Petter. And to me, I think we have a huge opportunity, but we don't want to screw it up. And I think that's true of this organization too. We have a huge opportunity. And that reminds me of a situation that I'll share with you. This is a note, an actual note written by an 8-year-old girl on her first flight. She was going from Los Angeles to Sydney, and she is loving it, and she decides to write the captain a note. And here's what it says, Sarah. Dear Captain, my name is Nicola. I'm 8 years old. This is my first flight, but I'm not scared. I like to watch the clouds go by. My mom says the crew is nice. I think your plane is good. Thanks for a nice flight. Don't fuck up the landing. Love, Nicola. So, with that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. But thank you very much for the opportunity. And come innovate with us. If you got a good idea, bring it on.
This is fantastic.
Thank you very much. Would you be willing to take 1 or 2 questions
Sure.
for 5 minutes?
Sure.
Anybody like to start an institute like this? Everybody? Yes?
Yeah.
Brilliant talk. So I'd love to know how long it took you to actually set up your institute.
How many years in the making?
Yeah,
for
that's a
this?
great question.
Yeah.
It always takes longer than you think. The Jacobs family approached me in 2005. They wanted to do a neuroscience center. And I said, let's do a vascular center. That's what's killing and crippling everybody in our community. It took me a good year and a half to convince our benefactor, Jerry Jacobs, that this was the way to go. And then in 2007, we had our first meeting with all the people out in the Jackson Hole area, at the Jackson Hole meeting. We started construction in 2009, and we opened up in about 2013. So it took a while.
And another question, how many sort of concepts have you taken from idea to actually commercial? Or
We have, well, this is another great story. So the doors open, and I go to Mr. Jacobs, and I say, the rent's due, and I assume you're going to pay it. He says, hell no, I'm not going to pay it. You pay it. I'm like, oh, that's not what I thought was going to happen here. So what it did is it forced us to think about revenue sources. In the first one we could think of, those very same steps that we use for product development are amazing for advanced training. In the first company that came to our rescue, and they did it almost immediately, was Covidian. And they were just really launching the pipeline device. And they agreed to come, and the CEO came and spent the day with us, and then the next thing we knew, we were training their physicians on how to place the pipeline. And we did it with those same steps we talked about. And that's grown. And then we went from training physicians to training engineers. And what company wouldn't love to have their engineers come spend time in a busy clinical environment like ours and have that Jacobs Institute at their fingertips as well? So then we even went to salespeople. And that's because the rent was so expensive. So, and then the most fun was that I met with the FDA at a TCT meeting. I'm trying to remember what year it was. It was about three years ago. And I met with Bram Zuckerman. I said, you know what, you should bring your reviewers here and let us train them. And don't you think that would help them better understand the technology that they are being forced to review? Instead of a huge stack of papers, let them have hands-on and see what they're actually approving. It took another year, and they finally came, and Carlos Pena, who was he's the head of the neuro division, at the end of the day, we took that model and we embolized a clot from down here somewhere, up into the middle cerebral artery, and then we had Carlos go and retrieve it. Here's the head of the neuro division of the FDA pulling a clot out of this model. And then the next thing I knew, we were training all the neuro division. We've now trained 3 groups of neuro. We've trained the EP group now, and we are about to train structural heart. So the FDA is now a partner with us, and it's worked out extremely well. And they love it because they're beginning to understand what they're reviewing. So, so that's paying the rent.